these cases. On the other hand, I suspect you did hear that Acorn committed voter fraud.
Yeah.
Acorn did not commit voter fraud, ever. There is not a single piece of evidence showing that any fraudulent vote was ever cast due to a fraudulent registration by one of Acorn's workers. One of Acorn's workers who were turned in to authorities by Acorn themselves when they were defrauded by this small handful of Acorn workers. And yet you heard about Acorn. You've heard about that over and over again. You've heard the lies about Acorn. And that has been in play now for years, even before Alec, by the way, as Rashad was talking about, even before Alec started pushing these bills, Republicans have been pushing this notion that there is massive Democratic voter fraud going on, and therefore we need polling place photo ID restrictions in order to stop it. Now, none of the fraud I just talked about, Mitt Romney's, Newt Gingrich's, Thaddeus McCotter's staff, the Secretary of State of Indiana, who was found guilty of three voter fraud felonies this year and thrown out of office. Indiana, by the way, is the first state in the union to require photo ID restrictions at the polling place, and yet their Secretary of State committed 3 counts of voter fraud. He was thrown out of office earlier this year for it. He's a Republican, and apparently the photo ID restrictions they had in place in Indiana did not stop the top election official in the state from actually committing voter fraud. Okay? Photo ID restrictions at the polling place are a scam. It is meant to keep people from voting, period. A recent study came out about 2 or 3 weeks ago confirming that there are 10 known cases of in-person polling place impersonation in this country since since the year 2000 in all 50 states. 10 cases. That's it. That's out of hundreds of millions of votes cast.
Explain it.
This is a scam.
From the electoral.
The in-person polling place impersonation is the only type of voter fraud that can possibly be stopped by polling place photo ID restrictions. That's it. And yet, they are dead set on trying to keep hundreds of and thousands of minorities, elderly, students, poor people from being able to cast their vote this year. It is horrible. It is worse than just photo ID restrictions, as Rashad was talking about. It's ending early voting hours. It's throwing dead people off the voting rolls who have this nasty habit of not actually being dead. Throwing off non-citizens off the voting rolls who have this nasty habit of not being non-citizens.
Law names?
What's that? Of people with law before their names? That's right. This is really bad this year. And before anybody starts celebrating because they think Mitt Romney is self-destructing, I would beg you and plead with you, do not count any chickens.
That's right.
Okay? This is bad. This is very bad, and I'm here to tell you about it. Now, one of the reasons why this is bad is the fault of progressives, is the fault of Democrats, is the fault of voting rights people. And I love Color of Change, so don't get me wrong here. I love the work Color of Change is doing. But the problem in this country when it comes to this photo ID issue is not voter ID. We have got to stop calling it voter ID. People hear that and they go, well, what's wrong with identifying yourself before you're going to vote? Now, Anat was talking about messaging, okay? This isn't a matter of framing to trick people into believing one thing or another. This is about facts. The facts are that voter ID is already required in a majority of states. It's required in all 50 states under federal law already for first-time voters. If you have not registered at the headquarters at the county, you will be required to show ID when you go to vote. Reasonable ID, bank statements, paycheck stubs, driver's licenses if you have it. There's nothing wrong with voter ID in and of itself. The problem is narrowly tailored polling place photo ID restrictions, state-issued photo ID, a certain type of photo ID that they know 25 million Americans who are eligible to vote do not have. Please, I'm begging you, stop calling it voter ID. It's polling place photo ID restrictions, and it is set to kill us in state after state after state. And when I say us, I mean us voters.
So it's
Us voters.
voter restriction.
This is not about, for me, this is not about Republicans or Democrats or anybody else. They all have enough supporters. People who don't have enough supporters are the voters. And I'm standing up for them. And I'm standing up for them in states like Kansas, which President Obama probably won't win. In Tennessee, which President Obama probably won't win. I don't care. I think everybody in Kansas who is eligible to vote ought to be able to cast their vote. And that's what I'm fighting for. And by the way, the Department of Justice ought to be fighting for it in Kansas, in Tennessee, in Pennsylvania,
They
in
fight for
all
that.
of these states under the Voting Rights Act where they are not currently bringing the fight. So we need to hold progressives accountable. We need to hold the administration accountable. We need to fight for voters. Now, sorry, I get worked up about this because I don't want to come back here in 4 years. We got to take care of this now. The fact of the matter is, if people get in to cast their vote, if they're allowed to get in to cast their vote, those votes still need to be counted and counted accurately, and in a way that we can know that they have been counted accurately. I've been speaking and thinking of Don Siegelman, former governor of Alabama. I've been speaking to him over the last week or so because he had to go back to jail, to federal prison last week for supposed bribery for a crime that has never been a crime in the history of this country. I won't go deep into those details. He's a former Democratic Alabama governor. He was brought down by Karl Rove and his cronies at the Department of Justice and in the judiciary. But the reason I'm bringing him up is because in the year 2002, Don Siegelman was up for re-election. He went to bed having been announced the winner. And when he was woken up in the middle of the night, he was told that in the middle of the night, in one Republican county in Alabama, they found that 5,000, actually I think it was over 6,000 votes, had been misallocated. From him originally, they were shifted over to his opponent, Bob Riley, who's whose campaign manager is married to the U.S. attorney who would eventually prosecute him, and they're all clients of Karl Rove. But what happened was his votes and his votes only were moved over from him to his opponent, and thus he lost the race. This was on paper ballots. Paper ballots, optically scanned, with an electronic tabulator made by Diebold, but he was never allowed to count those paper ballots. He just had to trust whatever the computers said was the truth. He was never allowed to count the ballots. We don't know if he actually won or lost that race. He believes his race was stolen from him. I tend to think he's right. In June of this year, in Wisconsin, you might have heard, there was a big election, some recall elections, and people were, again, counting their chickens leading up to the election. Everybody was feeling good. Looked like Scott Walker was going to be removed in this recall election. And when the polls closed at 8 o'clock on Tuesday night, June 5th, all of the network televisions, the news networks, Rachel Maddow, everybody else was saying, this is too close to call. It's going to be a long night. Get your popcorn out. We've been following these exit polls all day long, exit polls that we in the media get to watch that are taken from people walking out of the polling place. And we can and by the way, you don't get to look at those because you're just people, but the media gets to look at them, and they saw the people coming out of the polling place were saying, we're voting for Scott Walker. As a matter of fact, we're voting for Scott Walker, and we're even voting for President Obama. They supported by more than 8 percentage points. But in the Walker race, it was neck and neck. It's going to be a long night. We may not even know until morning, until dawn. And then in about 30 minutes, it was landslide Scott Walker. Now, by the time they announced the landslide for Scott Walker, not a single paper ballot cast in Wisconsin had actually been counted by any human being. Every single result that they reported on was from an electronic computer tabulator, which may or may not have been right. We don't know. But they presume it's right, and they count none of them by hand afterwards. The entire country will be using these machines again on November 6th. Now, just in case you think this is crazy talk and a conspiracy, nothing to worry about, these computers always get it right.
Oh.
They couldn't possibly malfunction. They couldn't possibly be manipulated. I will remind you that just 1 month, 2 months before the June 5th election in Wisconsin, down in Palm Beach, Florida, our old friends in Palm Beach, Florida, they had municipal elections there, and 3 different races were announced by the computer. 3 different candidates who lost the race were announced to be the winners by the same computers that were then used 2 months later to count the ballots in Wisconsin.
Oh.
Sequoia Optical Scan Systems, a company named Sequoia. They're now owned by all one company, but that was only found because the sharp-eyed election director in Palm Beach County, Susan Booker, actually bothered to look at a couple of those ballots by hand, and she noticed, wait, we got a problem here. These people who lost were announced the winners by these computers. Now, with all of this voter suppression that's been going on this year, and all of these Republicans trying to keep people from vote, I said I was nonpartisan in these issues. I am nonpartisan. But I'm also going to call out the bad guys when they are clearly the bad guys. And the Republicans are trying to keep you progressives from being able to cast your ballot. And all of the talk about this has obscured the concerns that we have, that I have, that you should have about the voting system that we use in this country. And when the winners are announced on the night of November 6th, please remember that we will have little or no idea if any of those winners or losers actually won or lost, because we don't count ballots in this country. I have been begging people to fight like hell for paper ballots over the years, and a lot of people have finally begun to get that message, even though 1/3 of the country will still vote on 100% unverifiable touchscreen voting machines this year. But a lot of people know that we need paper ballots. But we are not done when you cast a vote on paper. Stick around. Stay at the polling place. Try to count those goddamn ballots if you can. Keep your eyes on what's going on. And then for the long term, I have been able to find nothing more secure, nothing more reliable, nothing more overseeable and transparent, which is required for self-governance, than hand-counting paper ballots at the precinct on election night in front of all parties, all video cameras, and everybody in the public with the results posted at the precinct before those ballots are moved anywhere. That's the solution. How we get there between now and then is about education, is about giving the message correctly, is about letting people know we're talking about election fraud, not voter fraud. The voters are doing fine. Please leave them alone, unless they're Mitt Romney or Newt Gingrich or Thaddeus McCotter or these Republicans. We've got a voter fraud epidemic when it comes to Republicans. But by and large, the voters are doing fine. Please leave them alone. It's election fraud we need to worry about. And it's about getting the message out correctly. Not in a way that people can buy, but in a way that is truthful and accurate and reflects the problem we're faced with in this country. It's about the people. We've got to stand up. We've got to make noise. And we've got to make noise against the progressives and the Democrats who don't give the message out correctly. It starts here, and I ask you all to join me in this effort. Thank you, and I'll entertain your questions. Woo!
So the lesson about the message is something we can internalize and start right away with. But say 2 or 3 weeks before the actual election, what would you recommend as an election expert that we could do with our free time that we want to give?
Yeah.
Especially living in Southern California, where some issues like election fraud might not be in such play.
You make a great point, and by the way, please don't wait until 2 or 3 or 2 months before an election to start talking about these issues, because by and large, much of it is too late at that
Not
point.
talking, I mean, doing something, doing something.
Yeah, no, I'm adding that point, that we need to be talking about this all year round, because by now, it's too late to change the big things that really need to be changed before this election. But what can be done now? You got to make sure that you are registered. Just because you think you are registered does not mean you are still registered. You do not want a surprise on election day, and there is voter purges going on all across the country. So you need to check in on that. You also
Have
need...
your friends check in.
What's that?
Have your friends to check in wherever they are.
And have your friends check in, yeah, because this is really bad what's going on quietly, not being reported in the mainstream corporate media, and even in the alternative media. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of people are getting purged from the voting rolls, and this happens election after election. People go in and they find out they're not on the rolls anymore. Maybe they're allowed to count to cast a provisional ballot. That may or may not be counted. So make sure you're registered. Fight like hell, and this is more important outside of California because we have mostly paper ballots, unless you live in Orange County.
Yeah, but they're on the scanner.
But hang on, you got to fight for a paper ballot. If you live in a state, and there are many important swing states that have almost all touchscreen, 100% unverifiable touchscreen systems. Virginia, Pennsylvania, they're going to vote on unverifiable systems. Fight like hell to cast your ballot on a piece of paper. If you're allowed to do it on election day at the polls, do it. If you can't do it, if you have no choice on election day other than to vote on touchscreens, then vote absentee if you must. I'm not a fan of absentee voting or vote by mail. If you must do it to get your paper ballot, go ahead and do it, but try to bring it to the polling place or the county on election day.
Tell them more.
Yes, say why.
Well, the reason is because there's a lot of things that talk about black box voting. Go drop your ballot in a post office box, and good luck to you. Maybe it'll get counted, maybe it won't. Yes?
Could you speak to the way the press has,
They've sucked.
Sought-
I don't know what the
well, they
question
have.
is, but they've sucked.
this is when you've had discrepancies between polling and the so-called count at the election, and the way the press has begun to discredit the polling as opposed to the counting of the
Right. Well,
ballots.
you're right. The exit polls. This started happening around 2004. When all of the exit polls showed that John Kerry should have won in a whole bunch of swing states, but then the voting machines said something else, and so instead of saying, "Oh, well, there must be something wrong with the voting machines," they presume that there's something along with the exit polls. That's exactly, by the way, what happened in the Scott Walker race. I've got the audio. It kind of disappeared. I mean, the audio and the video of Rachel Maddow on election night saying, what happened here? Why were we seeing that it was neck and neck all day long when people were coming out of the polls? Why do we show Barack Obama favored by today's voters by 8%, and yet we've just had a landslide for Scott Walker? What happened here, she would ask. How could the exit polls possibly be so wrong?
Did she ask it?
So, do we know that the exit polls were wrong? Maybe they were. I don't know. But what we know that we don't know is whether or not the voting tabulators worked correctly. We have no idea, and those ballots still haven't been counted. Now, there happens to be a bipartisan coalition fighting like hell in every state in Wisconsin now to count those paper ballots by hand, and they're doing it, and they're finding all kinds of problems in various counties. My good friend Kathy Nicholas up in Waukesha County, if anybody knows her, she tried to destroy the ballots before they were going to be counted by these folks. So we had to fight to keep those safe. They're safe, we're told, for the moment, yet they haven't been counted. They're still trying to fight to count them. But why are we fighting to count
right,
our own
right,
ballots
right,
in a democracy?
Right.
Okay, yes.
Maybe we need a core team like Doctors Beyond Borders of auditors who volunteer to go in at the close of the polls and count them overnight.
We have that team.
We do?
They're called citizens.
But like an official,
They're not organized.
like a nonprofit group that comes and volunteers.
The citizens are nonprofit. We all ought to be doing it in every, I hear what you're saying. No, I hear what you're saying. But here's the thing, yeah, we need to organize. But the point is, we don't want to do it after the election. We don't want to do post-election audits, as I know that a lot of people call for. We want to count them right then and there at the ballot before those ballots move anywhere. That's a very difficult system to game. It's 100% transparent to the citizenry. And I'm open for other ideas, but I've been on this beat now for about 10 years, and I have not found a more transparent, more reliable way to count our ballots in a way that, if it's gamed, it is easily discovered. And
How
that's
would
the
you do
case.
that at this stage in the game, though? I mean,
At this stage in the
you're gonna
game, you
call
can't.
the Secretary of State and say, "I demand to count them." And
At this stage,
Santa Monica.
at this stage, you can't this early. But what you can do, I mean, this soon before an election. What you can do is you've got to start calling for paper ballot, hand-counted paper ballot pilot projects. Don't make the same mistake that the voting machine companies made when they came in and said, "Oh, this system works great. It's going to solve all your problems. What could possibly go wrong?" Instead, let's create data, let's create hand-counted paper ballot pilot projects to see how long it takes to do, how secure it is, how accurate it is compared to the voting machines. These are the things that progressives need to be fighting for rather than being on the defensive, saying, "Oh, please don't throw me off the rolls, please don't keep me from voting with these voter ID laws." We need to get on the aggressive to take back our democracy.
Which is what they did. They went and demanded, IDs. Remember that one election where they were harassing the voters? We need to go and demand the paper count.
Well,
Demand a hand count. Yes. Go ahead.
I did this one year at a polling place.
Promise.
Oh, do you call
No,
me
no,
Patty?
go ahead. No, you.
Okay. I did this one year. I went into a polling place. Now, first of all, the people that are running the precinct don't understand that you're allowed to do this. But I went in, and they said, it wasn't even my precinct, and I stayed, and they said, you can't stay here. I said, yes, I can, actually. And I convinced them that I wanted to count all the ballots by hand. And they said this was nuts, blah, 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 argue with me, but I won them over, and we ended up counting all the ballots, a pretty big
You did?
yeah.
The races? Or
You
just
counted the number
you
of ballots,
reconciled
not the
ballots?
actual
We
results.
reconciled the ballots to every single race and every single.
Wait.
No.
You found out who won and lost in the precinct?
No.
The number of ballots.
Number of ballots, and we compared them to the signing in, and it was really we did a whole bunch of stuff. We did it in 2 hours.
Jan asked, what can be done. Let me throw in one other thing along this lines that can be done. You can, at the poll, when the polls close, as I mentioned, be there with your cell phones and take pictures of these tapes that come off the voting machines, these result tapes, because results have a way of changing between the time that the machines print them out and the time that they show up on the web somewhere. Take photographs of those poll tapes. When the Republicans held the first all-important caucus of the year in Iowa this year, where they could set the rules for the election any way they wanted. Curiously enough, the Iowa GOP did not require anybody to show a photo ID, and they hand-counted all of the paper ballots at the polling place before those ballots were moved anywhere. And what do you know? Errors were found, and the results, as you remember, on election night, I think it was Mitt Romney was announced the winner. Turned out the real winner was Rick Santorum. And we know this because people were there watching the counting on election night, and they took pictures, and when the results went up on the GOP website, they said, "Hey, wait a minute, this was my precinct. Mitt Romney didn't get 22 votes here.
Yep.
He got 2 votes." And those results were changed because of that.
Yes.
Because there were citizens there to oversee their own elections. That's the way it must happen, oversee their own counting. Yes, hang on.
My understanding this year, we're going to see an immense mobilization of people challenging votes at the polls in Democratic precincts,
Yeah.
minority Democratic precincts.
Right.
And it really isn't about challenging the vote, it's about slowing down the vote.
Right.
And again, here's something that's gone completely off the landscape. When are we going to start hearing about a national holiday or the presidential election every
I'm in. I'm in.
Nobody talks about it anymore. So
I do.
I'm
I
sure
do,
you do,
but-
but for the most part, we don't.
Yeah, no, we do. And by the way, if we do that, well, it's in the weeds a bit, but if we should have a national holiday for Election Day, but we should move it to Wednesday instead of Tuesday, so people don't just skip town and take a long weekend instead.
Right,
But
right.
we need a holiday for voting. We need a law that says that every citizen of this country who is 18 years of age or older is eligible to vote.
Yes, they get that
That
with corn.
includes
At birth.
former Alabama Governor Don Siegelman, who was locked away for the next 6.5 years in a political prosecution in a federal prison. He doesn't get to vote
Right.
because he's a felon now.
Felon.
I don't see why he shouldn't get to vote. I don't see why all the people locked away on nonviolent drug crimes in this country shouldn't have a vote, shouldn't have a word in what is and isn't a crime in this country. And then we don't have to worry about all these registration games because, hey, if you're 18 years of age or older in this country as a citizen, you get to vote, period. So these are sort of some of the progressive ideas that we need to bring to this game instead of playing defensive all the time.